The boots Sarah wore the day she fled her uncle's house in Dallas belonged to a woman twice her size, stuffed with newspaper at the toes, and they gave her blisters that bled through her only pair of stockings before she even reached the edge of town. She was 20 years old and had never owned a pair of shoes that fit her properly, never mind boots sturdy enough for the journey she was undertaking. Her mother's shoes had been too small, pinching her toes until they cramped. Her cousins had been too wide, flopping with every step. The charity boots from the church ladies had holes in the soles. But none of that mattered now because Sarah was running, and the ill-fitting boots were all that stood between her feet and the unforgiving Texas dust of 1878. She had stolen $3 from her uncle's cigar box, enough to buy passage on a stagecoach heading west, away from the marriage he had arranged to a man 3 times her age with hands that grabbed and breath that reeked of whiskey. Her aunt had looked the other way when Sarah slipped out before dawn, and that small mercy was the only kindness the woman had ever shown her. The stage took her as far as Fort Stockton, where the driver informed her that her coins would carry her no further. She had walked the rest of the way to Shafter, her feet screaming with every mile, following a freight wagon whose driver allowed her to trail behind for safety, but offered nothing more. Shafter was a rough mining town in the shadow of the Chinati Mountains, where silver brought men seeking fortune, and the promise of wealth attracted every sort of desperate soul. Catherine Harlow, who went by Kate and ran the only boarding house that would accept single women, took one look at Sarah's bleeding feet and brought her inside without asking questions. Kate was a widow in her 40s with steel gray hair and a backbone to match, and she needed help with the cooking and cleaning now that her rheumatism made the stairs difficult. "You can work for your room and $1 a week," Kate said, her voice gruff but not unkind. "No men in your room, no drinking, no causing trouble. You break my rules and you are out on the street. Understood?" Sarah nodded, barely able to speak through her exhaustion. Kate led her to a small room under the eaves, not much bigger than a closet but clean and private, with a narrow bed and a washstand. Sarah collapsed onto the mattress, boots and all, and slept for 14 hours straight. The work was hard but honest. Sarah scrubbed floors, changed linens, prepared meals for the miners and drifters who rented rooms by the week. Her hands grew rough and her back ached, but she was free, and that made every moment of exhaustion worthwhile. She learned to navigate the town, keeping her eyes down and her interactions brief. Shafter was not a place for women alone, and she understood quickly that safety meant invisibility. The borrowed boots fell apart completely 3 weeks after her arrival. The sole separated from the leather upper one morning as she carried a bucket of water from the well, and she stood in the middle of the dusty street in her stockings, staring at the ruined footwear and fighting back tears. She had no money saved yet, and boots cost more than she could earn in 2 months, even if she ate nothing but the scraps from the boarding house kitchen. Kate found her a pair of old shoes that had belonged to her daughter, who had died of fever years before. They were too large, like everything else Sarah had ever worn, but she tied rags around her feet to make them fit and told herself she was grateful. The shoes rubbed new blisters on her heels and made her clumsy on the stairs, but they were better than nothing. It was October when the mountain man came to town, leading a string of mules loaded with furs and the lean, weathered look of someone who spent more time with trees than people. His name was Warren Garrett, though Sarah did not learn that immediately. She only noticed him because he was impossible not to notice. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed to fill doorways and arms thick with muscle earned from years of hard living. His hair was dark brown and hung past his shoulders, tied back with a leather cord, and his beard was full but neatly trimmed. He moved with the easy confidence of a man who knew his own strength and had no need to prove it. He took a room at Kate's boarding house, paying for a week in advance with coins that looked tiny in his calloused hands. Sarah was scrubbing the front steps when he arrived, and she kept her eyes down as he passed, as she did with all the men. But she felt his gaze on her, brief and assessing, not invasive but curious, and something about it made her heart beat faster. Warren Garrett was 32 years old and had lived in the mountains west of Shafter for 8 years, trapping and hunting, trading his furs in town twice a year for supplies and company. He had grown up in Missouri, left after the war that had taken his father and 2 brothers, and found peace in the solitude of the high country. He was not looking for complications, especially not the kind that came with pretty young women in borrowed shoes who jumped like startled deer whenever someone spoke to them. But Sarah Harlow, as he learned her name during dinner that first evening, intrigued him despite his better judgment. She served the meal with efficient, economical movements, never meeting anyone's eyes, never speaking unless spoken to. She was too thin, her dress too worn, her hair pulled back so tightly it must have given her headaches. But there was something in the set of her jaw, a determination that suggested she had survived things that would have broken weaker people, and Warren found himself watching her more than he should. On the third day of his stay, he came downstairs to find her struggling with a heavy trunk that one of the miners had left at the bottom of the stairs. She was trying to drag it up to the second floor, her face red with effort, her breath coming in gasps. The borrowed shoes kept slipping on the steps, and Warren could see that she was going to hurt herself if she kept trying. "Let me," he said, and she startled so badly she nearly dropped her end of the trunk on her own foot. "I can manage," she said quickly, automatically, the response of someone who had learned that accepting help always came with a price. "I know you can," Warren replied, his voice low and steady, "but there is no reason for you to when I'm standing right here." He did not wait for permission, simply took the trunk from her hands and lifted it as though it weighed nothing, carrying it up the stairs with easy strength. Sarah followed behind, uncertain and wary, half expecting him to demand something in return. But when he set the trunk outside the appropriate door, he simply nodded to her and went back downstairs without another word. She thought about that interaction for the rest of the day, puzzled by a kindness that seemed to expect nothing in return. Most men in Shafter looked at her with hunger or contempt or calculation. Warren Garrett had looked at her like she was a person, and she did not quite know what to do with that. 2 days later, she was carrying firewood from the shed when one of the miners, drunk before noon, grabbed her arm and pulled her close. His breath was sour and his grip painful, and Sarah froze, her mind blank with panic. She had escaped one forced marriage only to find danger everywhere she turned, and for a moment she could not remember how to breathe. Then Warren was there, moving faster than a man his size should have been able to move. He did not shout or threaten, he simply took hold of the miner's wrist and squeezed, and the man's face went white with pain. Warren removed the man's hand from Sarah's arm with deliberate care, his expression calm but his eyes cold. "You do not touch her," Warren said quietly. "You do not speak to her. You do not look at her. Are we clear?" The miner nodded frantically, and Warren released him. The man scurried away, cradling his wrist, and Warren turned to Sarah. His expression softened immediately, the coldness replaced by concern. "Are you hurt?" Sarah shook her head, still trembling. "No, I'm fine, thank you." "You should not have to thank someone for basic decency," Warren said, and there was frustration in his voice, though she sensed it was not directed at her. "This is not a safe place for you." "Nowhere is safe," Sarah replied before she could stop herself, and then flushed, embarrassed by the admission. Warren studied her for a long moment, and she had the uncomfortable feeling that he saw far more than she wanted to reveal. But all he said was, "If anyone bothers you again, you come find me. I mean that." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and he helped her carry the firewood inside before returning to whatever business had brought him to town. That evening, Kate called her into the kitchen after the dinner dishes were done. The older woman was sitting at the table, a cup of coffee in front of her, and she gestured for Sarah to sit. "Warren Garrett is a good man," Kate said without preamble. "Known him for years. He does not cause trouble, he does not drink to excess, and he does not bother women who do not want to be bothered. You do not need to be afraid of him." Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, defensive. "I'm not afraid of him." "Yes, you are," Kate said bluntly. "You are afraid of everyone, which is smart given where we live. But Warren is different. If he has offered you his protection, you should accept it. Men leave him alone, and they will leave you alone if they think you are under his watch." Sarah considered this, turning it over in her mind. She did not like the idea of needing protection, of being seen as someone who could not take care of herself. But practicality won over pride. She had learned the hard way that survival mattered more than independence. "Why would he care what happens to me?" she asked quietly. Kate shrugged. "Some men are just made that way. They see someone who needs help and they help. Warren is one of them. Don't question it too hard. Just be grateful." Warren left 3 days later. his business in town concluded, his mules loaded with supplies for the winter. Sarah watched him go from the window of the boarding house, feeling an odd sense of loss that made no sense. He was a stranger who had shown her a few kindnesses, nothing more. She had no claim on him and no reason to miss him. But she did. Winter came hard to Shafter that year, bringing winds that cut through the thin walls of the boarding house and cold that made Sarah's borrowed shoes feel like ice on her feet. She wrapped her feet in extra layers of cloth, but it did little good. The shoes were falling apart, the leather cracking and splitting, and she knew they would not last much longer. She saved every penny Kate paid her, counting the coins obsessively, trying to calculate how long it would take to afford new boots. At her current rate, it would be spring before she had enough. December brought a surprise. Kate came to her room one evening with a package wrapped in brown paper, tied with string. She set it on the bed without ceremony. "This came for you." Sarah stared at the package as though it might bite her. "For me? There must be some mistake." "No mistake. It has your name on it. Open it." With shaking hands, Sarah untied the string and pulled back the paper. Inside was a pair of boots, beautiful and sturdy, made of supple leather that had been carefully oiled. They were practical, not decorative, with good thick soles and strong stitching. But what made Sarah's breath catch was that they were her size. Actually her size. She could tell just by looking at them. There was a note tucked inside one of the boots, written in a strong, angular hand. "These should fit better than borrowed ones. Stay safe. W.G." Sarah held the boots against her chest and cried, great heaving sobs that she could not control. Kate sat beside her on the bed and patted her shoulder awkwardly, not asking questions, just offering silent comfort. When Sarah finally composed herself enough to speak, her voice was thick with emotion. "How did he know my size?" "He asked me," Kate admitted. "Said he noticed your shoes were falling apart and that you were too proud to ask for help. Had a bootmaker in Fort Stockton make them special. Cost him a fair amount, I would imagine." Sarah could not wrap her mind around it. A man she barely knew, who had no reason to care about her, had spent his own money to have boots made for her feet. Boots that fit. Boots that were hers, not borrowed or stolen or handed down. The gesture was so kind, so thoughtful, that it hurt almost as much as it helped. She wore the boots the next day, and they fit perfectly, snug without being tight, supporting her ankles and cushioning her steps. For the first time in her life, her feet did not ache at the end of the day. She felt like she could walk forever in these boots, could go anywhere, do anything. They were not just footwear, they were freedom. She thought about Warren constantly after that, wondering what kind of man noticed such a small detail about someone he barely knew, wondering why he cared, wondering if she would ever see him again to thank him properly. Winter deepened, and Shafter became a harder place. The mines slowed down as the cold made work dangerous, and tempers grew short. Kate's boarding house stayed busy, but the clientele grew rougher, and Sarah learned to move through the rooms like a ghost, never drawing attention to herself. The boots Warren had given her became a talisman, a reminder that somewhere in this harsh world there were people who showed kindness without expecting anything in return. February brought Warren back to town, earlier than Kate expected. He arrived in the middle of a snowstorm, his coat white with ice, his beard frosted. He looked tired and cold, but when Sarah opened the door to him, his eyes went immediately to her feet, and she saw the faint smile that crossed his face when he noticed she was wearing the boots. "They fit," he said, and there was satisfaction in his voice. "They fit," Sarah confirmed, her own voice shy. "Thank you. I do not know what to say. No one has ever done anything like that for me." "You do not need to say anything. I'm glad they help." He stomped the snow off his own boots and came inside, and Sarah took his coat to hang by the fire to dry. His presence filled the boarding house, made everything feel safer and warmer. The other men gave him respectful nods and kept their distance, and Sarah realized Kate had been right. Warren commanded a certain respect, and by extension, so did she. Over the next week, they fell into an easy rhythm. Sarah served his meals and he thanked her quietly. They did not speak much, but there was a growing comfort in the silence between them. Warren helped her with the heavy chores without being asked, and she made sure his coffee was always hot and his room always had fresh firewood, small kindnesses exchanged without ceremony. One evening, as she was clearing the dinner dishes, Warren spoke to her in a voice low enough that the other men could not hear. Would you walk with me tomorrow, just around town, in daylight? Sarah's heart jumped into her throat. Why? Because I would like to talk to you, Warren said simply. And I think you might like to get out of this house for a bit. But if you would rather not, that is fine too. No pressure. Sarah thought about it, weighing risk against desire. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to know more about this man who had shown her such unexpected kindness, but a lifetime of caution held her back. Just around town? She asked carefully. Nowhere private? Just around town, Warren confirmed. I will have you back before dark. I give you my word. And somehow, Sarah trusted that word. All right, tomorrow. They walked through Shafter the next afternoon, Warren shortening his long stride to match her pace, keeping a respectful distance between them. The town looked different from beside him. Men tipped their hats to Warren, and by extension, to her. No one made crude comments or leering looks. It was as though his presence created a bubble of safety around her. They talked as they walked, or rather, Warren asked questions, and Sarah answered in careful, measured words. He asked about her work at the boarding house, about whether she liked Shafter, about what she thought of the mountains. He did not ask about her past or why she had come to town, and she was grateful for that restraint. Have you always lived in the mountains? She asked, turning the conversation toward him. 8 years now, Warren replied. Came west after the war, needed space and quiet. Found both up there. Do you not get lonely? He considered the question seriously. Sometimes, but I find I prefer loneliness to bad company. Most people want something from you, want you to be a certain way or do certain things. The mountains just let me be. Sarah understood that more than she could say. That sounds nice. You would like it, Warren said, glancing at her. It is peaceful. Clean air, no crowds, no one watching your every move. Just you and the sky and the trees. The way he said it made it sound like an invitation, though Sarah told herself she was reading too much into his words. They were walking through town, nothing more. He was being kind, nothing more. She should not let herself hope for anything beyond that. But hope was a stubborn thing, and it had taken root in her chest despite her best efforts. That evening, as Warren was heading up to his room, he paused at the bottom of the stairs. Sarah was banking the fire in the common room, and he waited until she looked up at him. I'm heading back to my cabin in 3 days, he said. I would like to write to you, if that would be all right. Kate can hold the letters for me, and you can read them when you have time. No obligation to write back, but I would like to stay in touch. Sarah's heart was beating so hard she was certain he could hear it. I would like that, and I would write back, if you want me to. I would like that very much, Warren said, and his smile was warm and genuine, and made something in Sarah's chest ache with hope. The 3 days passed too quickly. Sarah found herself watching Warren whenever she could, memorizing the way he moved, the sound of his voice, the rare smiles he gave her when they passed in the hallway. On the last evening, Kate made a special dinner, her way of sending Warren off properly, and afterward, Warren asked Sarah to walk with him one more time. They stood outside the boarding house, their breath fogging in the cold air, and Warren pulled something from his coat pocket. It was a small carved wooden bird, smooth and perfect, every feather detailed. I made this for you, he said, pressing it into her hand. So you have something to remind you that there are places where you can be free, like the bird. Sarah closed her fingers around the carving, her throat tight with emotion. I will treasure it. Thank you. Take care of yourself, Sarah, Warren said, and there was intensity in his voice. If you ever need anything, you send word. Kate knows how to reach me. I mean that. I will. And Warren, thank you for the boots, for everything. You have been kinder to me than anyone in my whole life. Something flickered in Warren's eyes, something that looked like pain mixed with tenderness. You deserve kindness, Sarah. Do not ever forget that. He left before dawn the next morning, and the boarding house felt emptier without him. But Sarah had his letters to look forward to, and the carved bird that sat on her washstand, and the boots that fit her perfectly. They were tangible proof that Warren Garrett existed, that his kindness was real, and that maybe, just maybe, she was allowed to hope for more than mere survival. The first letter arrived 3 weeks later. Warren's handwriting was careful and strong, and his words were simple but heartfelt. He told her about his cabin, about the deer that came to drink from the stream nearby, about the silence of snow falling through pine trees. He asked about her work, about whether the boots were still holding up, about what she was reading. It was not a love letter, but there was affection in every line, and Sarah read it so many times she had it memorized. She wrote back, her own handwriting shakier, but earnest. She told him about the boarding house, about a funny incident with a miner who had mistaken salt for sugar, about a book Kate had loaned her. She thanked him again for the boots and told him she wore them every day. She did not tell him how much she missed him, but she suspected he knew anyway. The letters became a lifeline. Warren wrote every 2 weeks, and Sarah responded to each one. Through the words on the page, she learned about the man behind the quiet strength. She learned that he loved thunderstorms, that he was teaching himself to play the harmonica, that he had a scar on his shoulder from a mountain lion that had gotten too close to his traps. She learned that he was thoughtful and patient, and that he missed her, though he never said so directly. She felt it in the way he asked about her day, in the way he remembered small details she had mentioned in previous letters, in the way he always signed off with, "Thinking of you." Spring came slowly to Shafter, the snows melting to reveal mud and the first green shoots of new grass. Sarah had been in town for 8 months, and she had saved almost $30, a fortune by her standards. Kate had given her a raise, and Sarah was thinking about the future for the first time in her life. She was thinking about possibilities that did not involve running or hiding or just surviving. She was thinking about Warren, though she tried not to let herself want too much. In early April, Warren returned to town. Sarah was hanging laundry in the yard behind the boarding house when she heard Kate call her name. She turned to find Warren standing on the back porch, looking travel-worn and serious, and her heart leapt into her throat. "Warren," she breathed, dropping the shirt she had been hanging and moving toward him without thinking. "I did not know you were coming." "Neither did I," Warren admitted. "I planned to wait until summer, but I could not. I needed to see you." There was something in his voice that made Sarah's pulse race. "Is everything all right?" Warren stepped down from the porch, closing the distance between them. He was even larger than she remembered, his shoulders broad beneath his coat, his arms thick with muscle. But his eyes were gentle as they searched her face. "Sarah, I'm going to be very direct because I am not good with pretty words. I have been thinking about you every day since I left. I wake up thinking about you, and I go to sleep thinking about you. Your letters are the best part of my week. I find myself telling the trees about things that happened just so I can write them down for you later. This is not just friendship for me. I care about you. Deeply. And I need to know if there is any chance you might feel the same way." Sarah could hardly breathe. No one had ever spoken to her like this, with such raw honesty. She had been attracted to Warren from the first moment she saw him, had grown to care for him through his letters, but she had not let herself believe that he might return her feelings. "I care about you too," she said, her voice shaking. "I have tried not to because it seemed impossible. You live in the mountains and I live here, and I did not think you could want someone like me. Someone with nothing, someone who does not even have her own shoes except the ones you gave her." Warren reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hands in his. His hands were huge and calloused and warm, and they made hers feel small and safe. "Shy. Sarah, you are not nothing. You are strong and brave and kind, and I would be honored if you would let me court you properly. I know we have not spent much time together in person, but I feel like I know you through your letters. I want to know you better. I want to see if what I think is growing between us is real." "What about the distance?" Sarah asked, practical even in the midst of her emotional overwhelm. "You live days away from here." "I have been thinking about that," Warren said. "I could come to town more often, once a month instead of twice a year, and when winter comes, if things are going well between us, maybe you could come visit the cabin. Kate could come too, as a chaperone, so it would be proper. I just want a chance, Sarah. A real chance to see where this could go." Sarah looked at their joined hands, at the contrast between his rough skin and her own, and made a decision that felt like jumping off a cliff and growing wings at the same time. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I want that too. I want to see where this goes." Warren's smile was brilliant, transforming his serious face into something joyful and young. He squeezed her hands gently and then, with careful deliberation, leaned down and pressed a soft kiss to her forehead. It was chaste and respectful, and it made Sarah's entire body warm with happiness. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You will not regret this. I promise." Warren stayed in town for a week, and they spent every free moment Sarah had together. They walked through Shafter, sat on the porch of the boarding house in the evenings, talked about everything and nothing. Warren told her about his life before the mountains, about growing up on a farm in Missouri, about losing his family in the war, about the years of drifting before he found peace in the high country. Sarah, in turn, found herself sharing things she had never told anyone. She told him about her parents dying when she was 12, about being sent to live with an uncle who saw her as a burden and free labor, about the arranged marriage she had fled. "He should never have tried to force you into that," Warren said, his voice tight with anger when she told him about her uncle. "You were right to run." "I was terrified," Sarah admitted. "I still am sometimes. Terrified that he will find me and drag me back. Terrified that nowhere is really safe." Warren was quiet for a long moment, then said, "If he comes for you, he will have to go through me. And I promise you, Sarah, that is not a fight he would win." The words should have sounded like bravado, but from Warren they were simply a statement of fact. Sarah believed him completely. When Warren left at the end of the week, it was with the promise to return in a month. He kissed her goodbye, a real kiss this time, soft and sweet and full of promise. Sarah stood on the porch and watched him ride away, touching her lips and feeling like her life had finally started to make sense. The month until Warren's return felt like the longest of Sarah's life. She worked, and she waited, and she reread his letters until the paper grew soft from handling. When a new letter arrived 2 weeks after his departure, she tore it open eagerly and read his words with a smile on her face. Warren came back to town in May, staying for 5 days this time. They picked up where they had left off, the conversation flowing easily, the silences comfortable. Warren brought her small gifts, a bouquet of wildflowers, a smooth stone from the stream near his cabin, a book he thought she would enjoy. Sarah gave him a scarf she had knitted, her stitches uneven but earnest, and Warren wore it every day despite the warm weather, which made her ridiculously happy. On the last night of his visit, they sat on the porch after dinner, watching the sunset over the mountains. Warren took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "I have something I want to ask you," he said, "and I want you to think about it carefully before you answer. No pressure, no expectations, just consider it." Sarah's heart was pounding. "All right. When I come back in June, I want you to come to the cabin with me for a visit. Kate already said she would come as chaperone, and we would stay in Fort Stockton on the way, so it would be proper. I want to show you where I live, let you see if you could be happy there. Because, Sarah, I am falling in love with you, and I think you might be falling in love with me, and before this goes any further, I need you to see what my life is really like. The cabin is small, and the work is hard, and the winters are long. It is not an easy life, but it is a good one, at least for me. And I want to know if it could be good for you too." Sarah's throat was tight with emotion. He was falling in love with her. Warren Garrett, this strong, kind, impossible man, was falling in love with her. "I think I am already in love with you," she whispered. "I have been for a while now, and yes, I want to see your cabin. I want to see your life. I want to know all of you." Warren pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, and Sarah leaned into his strength. She felt safe for the first time in years, truly safe, and it was a revelation. "I will take such good care of you," Warren murmured into her hair. "I will spend every day making sure you never regret choosing me." "I could never regret you," Sarah said fiercely. "You are the best thing that has ever happened to me." They sat together until Kate called them inside, wrapped in each other's arms, and Sarah thought about the future, with hope instead of fear. Warren returned in late June, bringing an extra mule for Sarah and Kate to ride. The journey to his cabin took 3 days, winding through increasingly rugged terrain, up into the mountains where the air was thin and clean, and the silence was broken only by birdsong and the wind through the pines. Kate grumbled about the discomfort, but seemed to enjoy herself nonetheless, and Sarah was too enchanted by the landscape to care about the aches in her muscles. Warren's cabin sat in a small clearing beside a stream, surrounded by towering pines. It was small, as he had said, just one large room with a sleeping loft, but it was well built and sturdy. The inside was neat and practical, with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, and shelves lined with supplies. There was a smaller cabin 20 yards away, which Warren had built years ago for storage, and he had cleaned it out and made it comfortable for Kate to stay in, giving Sarah the loft in the main cabin for propriety's sake. "What do you think?" Warren asked as Sarah stood in the middle of the cabin, taking it all in. "I think it is perfect," Sarah said honestly. "It feels like you, solid and strong and safe." Over the next week, Sarah fell in love with Warren's life as much as she had fallen in love with the man himself. She learned how he spent his days, checking his trap lines, hunting for meat, tending a small garden, maintaining the cabin and his equipment. She helped where she could, learning to skin rabbits and cure hides, to preserve food for the winter, to identify edible plants. The work was hard but satisfying, and she felt more alive than she ever had scrubbing floors in the boarding house. Warren taught her to fish in the stream, standing behind her and guiding her hands as she learned to cast the line. He took her on long walks through the forest, showing her the landmarks he used to navigate, the places where bears denned and elk grazed. He played his harmonica for her in the evenings, clumsy but earnest, and she sang along to the songs she knew. Kate watched them with approval, seeing how they moved around each other with easy familiarity, how they laughed together, how Warren looked at Sarah like she was something precious. On the 6th night, Warren took Sarah's hand and led her outside to sit on the bench he had built in front of the cabin. The stars were brilliant overhead, more than she had ever seen in town, and the air smelled of pine and wood smoke. "Sarah, I want to ask you something important," Warren said, his voice serious, "and I need you to be completely honest with me." "All right," Sarah said, her heart racing. "Could you be happy here? Not just for a visit, but for a life. Could you be happy living in the mountains, far from town, with just me for company most of the time? Because if the answer is no, that is all right. I will not pressure you. I will keep courting you, and we will figure something else out. But if the answer is yes, then I want to marry you, Sarah. I want you to be my wife. I want to build a life with you here." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but they were happy tears. "Warren, I have never been as happy as I have been this week. Waking up to the sound of the stream, helping you with the work, sitting with you in the evenings. It feels right. It feels like home. The answer is yes. Yes, I want to marry you. Yes, I want to build a life with you." Warren let out a shaky breath and pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside was a simple gold band, worn smooth with age. "This was my mother's ring," he said quietly. "It is the only thing I have left from before the war. I would be honored if you would wear it." Sarah held out her hand, trembling, and Warren slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, like the boots he had made for her, and Sarah thought about how Warren had spent his whole life making sure she had things that fit, that belonged to her. "I love you," she said, throwing her arms around his neck. "I love you so much." Warren held her close, his strong arms wrapped around her, and kissed her with a passion that left her breathless. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "We will do this right," Warren said. "We will go back to Shafter and get married proper, with Kate as witness and anyone else you want there. Then I will bring you back here and spend the rest of my life making you happy." They returned to Shafter 2 days later, and Kate immediately began planning the wedding with an enthusiasm that surprised everyone. Sarah wrote a careful letter to Warren's nearest neighbor, a retired preacher who lived a day's ride away, asking if he would perform the ceremony. The preacher agreed, and they set the date for mid-July. The weeks before the wedding passed in a blur of preparation. Kate helped Sarah make a new dress, simple but pretty, in a soft blue fabric that brought out her eyes. Warren commissioned a local carpenter to make furniture for the cabin, a proper bed frame, a rocking chair, a wardrobe for Sarah's clothes. He bought supplies for the winter, twice as much as he usually needed, now that he would have a wife to provide for. Sarah found herself overwhelmed by the reality of what was happening. She was getting married, she was going to be Warren's wife, she was going to live in the mountains and build a life with this incredible man who had seen her at her lowest and chose to love her anyway. It seemed too good to be true, and she kept waiting for something to go wrong. The night before the wedding, Kate found her sitting on the porch, staring at the stars and worrying. "Having second thoughts?" Kate asked, settling into the chair beside her. "No," Sarah said immediately. "Not about Warren. I love him. I want to marry him. I'm just scared." "Of what?" Sarah struggled to put it into words. "That I will wake up and this will all have been a dream. that something will happen to take it all away. I have never had anything good that lasted. What if I do not know how to be happy? What if I ruin this? Kate reached over and patted her hand. Sarah, you have survived things that would have destroyed most people. You ran away from a bad situation with nothing but borrowed boots and sheer determination. You have worked hard and saved money and built a life for yourself here. You are strong and brave, and you deserve every bit of happiness coming your way. Warren knows who you are, all of you, and he loves you anyway. Trust that. Trust him. And trust yourself. Sarah took a shaky breath and nodded. You're right. I'm being silly. You're being human, Kate corrected. Now go to bed. You have a wedding tomorrow and you should look rested. The wedding took place in the afternoon in the small church at the edge of Shafter. It was a simple ceremony, attended by Kate, the preacher, and a handful of people from the boarding house who had grown fond of Sarah over the months. Warren wore his best clothes, his hair neatly combed, his beard freshly trimmed. Sarah wore her blue dress and her boots, the ones Warren had made for her, because she wanted to carry that symbol of his care with her as she married him. The preacher spoke about love and commitment and the sanctity of marriage. But Sarah barely heard the words. She was too focused on Warren, on the way he looked at her like she was the only person in the world, on the feel of his hand holding hers, warm and steady. When the preacher asked if she would take Warren as her husband, she said yes with her whole heart. And when Warren slipped a second ring onto her finger, a wedding band to go with his mother's engagement ring, her eyes filled with tears. You may kiss your bride, the preacher said, and Warren cupped her face in his large hands and kissed her so tenderly that Sarah forgot to breathe. They were married. She was Sarah Garrett now, wife to Warren Garrett, and she had never been happier. The celebration afterward was small but joyful. Kate had made a cake, and there was music and laughter. Sarah danced with Warren in the middle of the church, his arms around her waist, and felt like she was floating. When the evening ended, Warren helped her onto her mule, and they rode out of Shafter together, headed for the mountains and their new life. The ride took 2 days, and they camped under the stars the first night. Warren built a fire, and they sat close together, talking quietly, Sarah's head on his shoulder. When it was time to sleep, Warren gave her his bedroll and slept by the fire, keeping watch, and Sarah loved him even more for his respect and care. They reached the cabin on the second afternoon, and Warren swept Sarah into his arms and carried her across the threshold, making her laugh with delight. He set her down gently in the middle of the cabin, which looked different than it had during her visit. There were curtains on the windows now, made from fabric Warren had bought in town. The new furniture was in place, the bed made up with fresh linens. Wildflowers sat in a jar on the table, and the whole space felt warm and welcoming. Welcome home, Mrs. Garrett, Warren said, and Sarah kissed him in response, pouring all her love and gratitude into the embrace. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, Warren taking his time to make sure Sarah felt loved and cherished. He was gentle with her inexperience, patient and caring, and when it was over, Sarah lay in his arms and felt truly safe for the first time in her life. She was home. She was loved. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. Life in the mountains settled into a rhythm over the following months. Sarah learned quickly, her natural intelligence and determination making her an apt student. Warren taught her to shoot, patiently correcting her stance until she could hit a target more often than not. She learned to read the weather, to track animals, to preserve food for the winter. She took over the cooking and the garden, taking pride in keeping their home comfortable and well-stocked. They worked side by side during the day and fell into each other's arms at night, their love deepening with every passing week. Warren was attentive and affectionate, always making sure Sarah knew she was valued. He asked her opinion on decisions, listened when she spoke, made her feel like an equal partner. Sarah bloomed under his care, becoming more confident and self-assured. The first winter was hard, as Warren had warned, but they faced it together. The snows came heavy and the temperatures dropped below anything Sarah had experienced. They were snowed in for weeks at a time, dependent entirely on their stored supplies and each other. But Sarah did not mind the isolation. She had Warren, and that was enough. They read together by the fire, played cards, told each other stories. Warren worked on his furs and Sarah sewed and knitted, making clothes and blankets. They made love in the warmth of their bed while the wind howled outside, and Sarah thought that she had never been so content. Spring came eventually, as it always did, melting the snow and bringing green back to the world. Sarah discovered she was pregnant in April, and Warren's joy was so pure and unrestrained that it made her cry. He became even more protective, if that was possible, doing the heavy work himself and making sure Sarah rested. He built a cradle from smooth pine, sanding it until there were no rough edges, and Sarah stitched blankets and tiny clothes, marveling at how small they were. Their son was born in November, during the first snowfall of the year. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Sarah was frightened, but Warren stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and murmuring encouragement. When the baby finally arrived, squalling and red-faced and perfect, Warren wept openly. They named him William, after Warren's father, and he had Warren's dark hair and Sarah's eyes. Warren was a devoted father from the first moment, cradling his son with infinite care, singing to him in a low, rumbling voice that always seemed to calm the baby's cries. Sarah watched her husband with their son and fell in love with him all over again. The next few years were the happiest of Sarah's life. William grew into a sturdy, curious toddler who followed his father everywhere, and Sarah gave birth to a daughter they named Catherine, after Kate, who had given Sarah a chance when she had nowhere else to go. The cabin felt full of life and love, and Sarah often found herself pausing in the middle of chores to simply appreciate her good fortune. They made the trip to Shafter once a year so the children could see other people, and Sarah could visit Kate. The older woman was slowing down, her rheumatism worsening, but she was delighted with Sarah's children and always had treats saved for them. Warren sold his furs and bought supplies, and they spent a few days in civilization before returning to the mountains. On one such visit, when William was 5 and Catherine was 3, they encountered a man in the street who made Sarah freeze in her tracks. It was her uncle, older and grayer but unmistakable, and the sight of him brought back all the fear and helplessness she had felt fleeing Dallas 7 years before. Her uncle saw her too, and his eyes widened with recognition. He started toward her, his face angry, and Sarah instinctively moved closer to Warren. Her husband sensed her fear immediately, stepping between her and the approaching man, his hand resting on the knife at his belt. "Sarah," her uncle said, his voice sharp, "I have been looking for you. You have no right to run off like that, to shame the family. You are coming back to Dallas with me right now." "No, I am not," Sarah said, her voice shaking but firm. She held Catherine closer and kept William behind her. "I am not going anywhere with you." "You do not have a choice," her uncle snarled. "You are my responsibility, and I say you are coming home." Warren's voice was calm, but carried an edge of danger that made Sarah's uncle take a step back. "She is not your responsibility. She is my wife, and these are my children. You have no claim on her." "She ran away from her obligations," her uncle protested, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. Warren was an imposing figure, and the promise of violence in his stance was clear. "She ran away from a forced marriage to a man who would have hurt her," Warren said coldly. "She had every right to flee, and she is not going anywhere except back to our home in the mountains. If you try to follow us or contact her again, you will regret it. Are we clear?" Her uncle looked between Warren's implacable face and Sarah's determined one, and something in him seemed to deflate. "Fine. Keep her. She was always more trouble than she was worth anyway." He turned and walked away, and Sarah sagged against Warren with relief. Her husband wrapped his arms around her and their children, holding them close. "He cannot hurt you," Warren murmured. "I will never let anyone hurt you." "I know," Sarah whispered back. "I know. Thank you." That night, lying in bed at Kate's boarding house with their children asleep between them, Warren took Sarah's hand. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. "I am," Sarah said, and she meant it. Seeing him was frightening, but I realized something. He has no power over me anymore. I have built a life, a good life, and he cannot take it away. I have you and William and Catherine, and that is worth more than anything. Warren kissed her forehead. "You are the strongest person I know. I am so proud of you." They returned to the mountains the next day and never looked back. The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythm of seasons and the growth of their children. William grew tall and strong like his father, learning to hunt and trap, to survive in the wilderness. Catherine was clever and quick, always asking questions, always exploring. Sarah taught them both to read and write, using the books Warren brought back from town and the lessons she remembered from her own scattered education. Warren added a second room to the cabin when Sarah became pregnant with their third child, a second son they named Theodore. The family continued to grow, and the cabin grew with it, Warren's skilled hands shaping wood into walls and furniture. He built a barn for the goats and chickens Sarah had insisted on, a smokehouse for preserving meat, a root cellar for storing vegetables. Their small homestead became more self-sufficient each year. Kate passed away peacefully in her sleep when Sarah was 35, and Sarah grieved deeply for the woman who had given her a chance when she had nothing. They made the trip to Shafter for the funeral, and Sarah was surprised to discover that Kate had left her the boarding house in her will. After discussing it with Warren, they decided to sell the property and use the money to expand their homestead further, buying more land and livestock. Sarah's life was full of hard work and simple pleasures. She woke each morning to the sound of the stream and Warren's steady breathing beside her. She spent her days cooking and cleaning and caring for their growing family, tending her garden and her animals, working alongside her husband to maintain their home. The work was never ending, but it was satisfying in a way her work at the boarding house had never been. This was her home, her family, her life, and every moment of effort went toward building something lasting. Warren remained devoted and loving, even as the years weathered them both. His hair began to gray at the temples, and lines appeared around his eyes, but to Sarah he was as handsome as the day they met. He still held her hand when they walked, still kissed her goodbye each morning when he left to check his traps, still told her he loved her every single day. Their marriage had its challenges, as all marriages do, but they faced them together, talking through disagreements and supporting each other through difficulties. Sarah turned 40, Warren gave her a gift that made her cry. It was a new pair of boots, handmade like the first pair he had given her, but even more beautiful. The leather was soft and supple, dyed a deep brown, with delicate tooling along the sides that must have taken him hours to complete. "Your old boots are getting worn," Warren said as she held them, tears streaming down her face. "I wanted to make sure you always have boots that fit, that you never have to borrow shoes from anyone ever again." Sarah set the boots aside and threw her arms around her husband, holding him tight. "You gave me so much more than boots," she whispered. "You gave me a home. You gave me safety. You gave me love. You gave me a life I never dreamed I could have." "You gave me the same," Warren replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I was just surviving before I met you. You taught me how to live, how to be happy, how to love. Everything good in my life comes from you." They held each other for a long time, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. The years continued to roll forward. William married at 22, bringing his wife Emma to live on the homestead they helped him build on the edge of Warren and Sarah's property. Catherine married at 20, moving with her husband to a ranch 2 days' ride away. Theodore showed no interest in marrying, content to stay on the mountain and work alongside his father. The grandchildren began to arrive, and Sarah found herself in the role of grandmother, spoiling her daughter and son's children just as Kate had spoiled hers. Warren slowed down as he reached his 60s, his joints stiffening with age and old injuries. He could no longer run his trap lines as extensively as he once had, but he taught William and Theodore everything he knew, passing down the skills that had sustained him for decades. He spent more time around the homestead, building and repairing, watching his grandchildren with contentment. Sarah aged too, her hair going silver, her hands becoming gnarled with arthritis. But she remained active, still tending her garden, still cooking for her family, still capable and strong. The borrowed boots from her youth were long gone, worn to nothing and discarded, but she had owned many pairs of boots since then, all made by Warren's hands, all fitting her perfectly. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the cabin for a celebration. There was food and music and laughter, and Sarah looked around at the faces of her family and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This life, this beautiful, full life, had all started because a mountain man had noticed that her shoes did not fit and cared enough to do something about it. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Sarah and Warren sat on the bench outside the cabin, the same bench where he had proposed all those years ago. Warren's arm was around her shoulders, and her head rested against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Do you remember the day we met?" Warren asked quietly. "Of course," Sarah replied. "You were the biggest man I had ever seen, and I was terrified you would be like all the others, but you were kind. You saw me." "You were so brave," Warren said, "standing there in those terrible boots that did not fit, working so hard, trying to make a life for yourself. I knew from that first day that you were special. I just did not know how to tell you." "The boots told me," Sarah said softly. "When they arrived, I knew. I knew you saw me, really saw me, and that you cared. That was the moment I started to believe that maybe I deserved good things." "You have always deserved good things," Warren said fiercely. "You deserve everything." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars, and Sarah thought about the girl she had been at 20, running away with nothing but borrowed boots and hope. She thought about the woman she had become, strong and loved and surrounded by family. She thought about the man who had given her all of it, not through grand gestures, but through consistent daily kindness. "I love you," she said. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too," Warren replied. "Marrying you was the best decision I ever made. You are my heart, Sarah, always." Warren lived to be 73, passing peacefully in his sleep on a cold January night. Sarah was 61 and felt like part of her soul had been torn away. The grief was overwhelming, a physical weight that made it hard to breathe. But she was surrounded by her children and grandchildren, and they held her up through the worst of it, just as she had held them up through their own struggles over the years. Sarah continued to live on the mountain for another 12 years, cared for by Theodore and his family who had taken over the main cabin, while Sarah moved into the smaller cabin that had once been Kate's during that first visit so long ago. She spent her days in her garden, with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, remembering Warren and the life they had built together. She kept the boots he had made for her 40th birthday in a place of honor, polished and cared for, even though her feet no longer fit into them properly. They were a reminder of everything Warren had been to her, practical and beautiful, made with care, designed to carry her through life. Sarah passed away at 73, the same age Warren had been, and her children buried her beside him in the small cemetery they had established on a hill overlooking the valley. On her gravestone, Theodore carved the words she had requested. She was loved, and she was home. The homestead continued, passed down through generations, but the story of Sarah and Warren became part of the family legend. The great-grandchildren would ask about the beautiful old boots in the glass case in the main cabin, and they would be told the story of a young woman who had never owned shoes that fit until a mountain man made her boots just for her feet. They would be told about love that started with simple kindness, about two people who built a life together in the mountains, about the importance of seeing people and caring for them in practical ways. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind moved through the pines, the family members who lived on the mountain swore they could hear two voices laughing together, still in love after all these years, still together, still home. The boots remained in their case for generations, a tangible reminder that love shows itself not just in words but in actions, not just in grand gestures, but in noticing what someone needs and taking the time to provide it. They were a reminder that sometimes the most romantic thing a person can do is see someone for who they really are and love them, not despite their circumstances, but through them. Sarah had come to Shafter with nothing but borrowed boots and fear. She had left a legacy of love, family, and the knowledge that home is not a place, but a person who sees you, truly sees you, and chooses to stay.